They built entire narratives about you, feeding off each other's fear and imagination, convinced that your silence hid guilt. They turned whispers into evidence, glances into confessions, and your distance into deceit. They spent years tracking shadows, mistaking mystery for menace. You didn't fight back, because you understood something they didn't. Truth doesn't chase rumor. You let them weave their stories, until they tangled themselves in them. You watched as obsession devoured reason, how curiosity turned to paranoia. They were never hunting for truth. They were hunting for validation. You refused to supply it. You became the villain in their fantasy, and that frightened them more than if you'd fought. Because villains act. You simply existed, and that was enough to expose their fragility. You learned early that people need someone to blame when they can't face their own reflection. You became that mirror. They projected their confusion, their fear, their insecurities onto you, hoping to destroy what they couldn't understand. But projection always backfires. You held your composure while they unraveled. You let them dig, let them waste years looking for something that didn't exist. You weren't running from them. You were watching them exhaust themselves. You didn't correct their assumptions because correction feeds illusion. Instead, you mastered the art of redirection, responding without revealing, smiling while they dissected your every move. By the time they realized the truth, they were too deep in their own lies to admit it. Their obsession with you was never about you. It was about control. They couldn't stand that you operated outside their expectations. They needed a label for you, a reason that fit their limited perception. But you were too fluid? They called that danger. You call it freedom. Their world runs on categories. Yours runs on clarity. While they analyzed your motives, you kept living. You were never trying to prove innocence. You were trying to preserve peace. They thought your detachment was guilt, but it was intelligence. Why explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding? You learned that silence reveals more than defense ever could. Psychologically, people can't handle ambiguity. It terrifies them to meet someone they can't decode. They need boxes, roles, definitions to feel safe. You refused to fit any. That's why they turned on you. You represented everything they suppress in themselves. The unknown, the unbothered, the unexplainable. They tried to simplify you, to pin you down with their shallow understanding. But the more they tried, the more complex you became. They called it manipulation. You called it existence. You were never hiding, they were never looking correctly. That's what drove them mad. The realization that your life operated beyond the rules they lived by. They studied your moves, analyzed your expressions, tracked your words like evidence in a trial. Every sentence you spoke became an artifact of suspicion. You learned to let them. Let them waste time decoding what was never encrypted. You let their paranoia expose itself. Their investigation turned into obsession, their obsession into admiration, and their admiration into quiet resentment. You stopped reacting long before they stopped watching. You became an event in their minds, a mystery that defined them more than it ever defined you. That's how power shifts. When they start living in reaction to your stillness, you own their focus. You never asked for it, but you learned how to use it. Their downfall began when they realized the truth was ordinary. You weren't hiding scandals or secrets. You were hiding simplicity. You lived quietly, acted deliberately, and that bored their chaos. They needed drama to feel alive, so they created it in your image. You became their entertainment, their cautionary tale, their conversation filler. And yet, through all of it, you remained still. That's what destroyed them, the realization that you never cared. Their years of scheming, gossiping, investigating meant nothing to you. They built entire conspiracies around someone who never noticed their noise. And nothing crushes an ego faster than realizing it has been shouting into silence. You understood something they didn't. Attention has gravity. The more they gave you, the more you controlled them. They were too emotional to see it. You learned to weaponize patience. You let time handle your defense. Knowing that every lie burns itself out, they mistook your stillness for weakness. But you weren't frozen. You were observing, waiting for the world to reveal itself. You knew that the longer they watched, the more their motives would betray them. And when truth surfaced, it didn't come gently. It came like an earthquake. Their faces cracked, their words contradicted, their alliances dissolved. You didn't need to fight. They destroyed themselves by chasing ghosts. They expected guilt, but you carried grace. They expected panic, but you brought peace. You didn't need to clear your name. You became the evidence. That's what confounded them. They spent years searching for your breaking point and found none. You weren't reacting the way normal people do, and that made you dangerous. They didn't understand that power doesn't come from dominance. It comes from detachment. You no longer cared about approval. You no longer needed to be seen. That kind of freedom terrifies the insecure because it mirrors their dependence. You weren't untouchable because you fought harder. You were untouchable because you stopped fighting at all. In the end, they didn't find guilt. They found mastery. You had evolved while they circled in repetition. You had turned every accusation into energy, every betrayal into blueprint, every rumor into reminder. You used their noise to refine your silence. You stopped chasing fairness because fairness doesn't exist in a world built on perception. You built truth internally and let it radiate externally. And when that truth became visible, it dismantled their entire illusion. The same people who once accused you now avoid your gaze. They can't face the proof of their own blindness. You never punished them. Reality did. They told you to accept defeat quietly, to fold with dignity, to step aside when the world pushed back. But that was never in your nature. You were built to resist the slow fate of surrender. You've seen what happens when people go gentle into the night. They disappear while still breathing. They stop dreaming, stop fighting, stop remembering who they are. You refused that death in disguise. You decided your story would not end in silence. Every scar you carry burns brighter than resignation. You understood that life doesn't reward the polite, it rewards the persistent. You weren't born to whisper apologies to chaos. You were born to walk through it, roaring in your own rhythm. They call it stubbornness, but it's survival. You don't go quietly because quiet endings are for those who never truly lived. There's a kind of violence and persistence, the good kind, the kind that refuses to yield when everything collapses. You've felt that fire. You've heard the voice that says give up, and you've told it to shut up. You've stood in ruins and seen potential, stood in rejection and seen redirection. They can't understand that your fight isn't anger, it's devotion. You don't fight for attention, you fight to stay awake in a world that loves to numb you. Every time you've been told to stay still, you moved anyway. You've learned that comfort is the most beautiful form of decay. You don't seek peace through surrender, you find it through resistance. They think survival is about safety. You know it's about rebellion. You've watched them settle for less, trading their fire for stability. They call it maturity, but you know it's resignation disguised as wisdom. You've seen people become ghosts of their younger selves, walking through life on autopilot. You refused to join them. You decided to burn instead of fade. You understood that passion doesn't have to be loud. It just has to keep moving. They gave up chasing meaning because it made them uncomfortable. You found meaning in the discomfort itself. You learned that friction creates growth, that peace without purpose is just waiting for decay. You refuse to die before you're done. That's what it means to not go gentle. You keep demanding more from existence, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. They thought endurance was about enduring pain, but you discovered it's about transforming it. Every heartbreak, every failure, every betrayal became a catalyst instead of a coffin. You've mastered the art of alchemy, turning despair into direction. While others drown in self-pity, you construct stepping stones from the very weight meant to sink you. That's your rebellion. You don't go gentle because you've learned that the world tests conviction, not comfort. They call you obsessive, but obsession is just focus that refuses distraction. You carry your suffering like fuel, not baggage. You don't collapse under pressure, you solidify. They don't understand that resilience isn't born from strength, it's born from exhaustion that still decides to rise. Your defiance comes from clarity. You've seen the clock move faster with every passing year, and you've realized how fragile opportunity is. That's why you don't waste time pretending to be humble for a world that rewards mediocrity. You walk with intensity because every second matters. They move like they have infinite tomorrows. You move like this is your last hour to prove something to yourself. You've stopped begging for ease because ease is the death of greatness. You want the struggle, the friction, the grind, because that's where transformation hides. Going gentle means letting life flatten you. You were born to stand tall in chaos, to break through your limits while others watch from safety. You'd rather be exhausted from growth than comfortable in stagnation. You've noticed how they avoid discomfort. They run from failure, numb themselves with distraction, and call it balance. You move differently. You see discomfort as signal, not punishment. You don't chase suffering, but you don't fear it either. You use it. You treat every obstacle as instruction, every delay as preparation. While they look for escape routes, you build endurance. You've learned to sit in the fire until it bends to your will. That's what makes you dangerous. You don't panic in storms, you strategize. You don't crumble under pressure, you clarify. You've made peace with the reality that greatness has a cost, and you've decided to pay it. The world fears that kind of resolve because it exposes their excuses. They expect compliance from those who've been broken. They expect tired souls to surrender quietly, to accept the script written for them. You tore that script apart. You wrote your own narrative with the ink of experience and the patience of scars. You refused to be a statistic of surrender. Every time they thought you'd fade, you returned sharper. You became the embodiment of refusal, the kind that shakes systems, not just people. You don't go gentle because you've seen what happens when people do. They become predictable, forgettable, safe. You chose danger. You chose truth over comfort. You chose impact over peace. That's what makes you alive in a world obsessed with appearing calm while slowly dying inside. You've grown immune to pity. You no longer want to be rescued, you want to rise. They mistake your fire for anger, but anger fades. This doesn't. This is purpose wearing armor. You've stopped explaining why you move differently because words can't justify evolution. They want you to slow down because your existence exposes their stagnation. You've seen how mediocrity defends itself. By shaming ambition, by calling focus obsession, by disguising laziness as contentment. You don't buy it anymore. You've realized that peace without pursuit is just a slower form of death. So you keep climbing, keep creating, keep defying. You go to sleep tired but not defeated. That's your victory. You still burn while others fade. You've come to understand that fighting back doesn't always mean aggression. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's rebuilding. Sometimes it's refusing to quit when quitting makes the most sense. You've learned that strength doesn't need witnesses. You move quietly because you don't owe your effort to applause. You go to war with inertia daily. You wrestle with doubt and still choose motion. That's what separates the rare from the rest. Not talent, but refusal. They gave up because it was practical. You stayed because it was necessary. The night might come for everyone, but you vowed to meet it standing, not crawling.